Imagine if someone who was supposed to know you best suddenly became convinced that you weren't you, that you were an imposter. Imagine if they were so convinced of this that they were determined to kill you. This very thing, unfortunately, happened to a young woman in Ireland in 1895. The murder case that followed would probe the most frightening depths of the human psyche and expose the very darkest face of folklore. Welcome back to Historical Horror, a series in which I draw upon my two absolute favorite subjects to bring you the strangest, creepiest, darkest tales from our past. Today, we're talking about the murder of Bridget Cleary. And just fair warning, this is a good one. This is one of my favorite historical horror stories, but it is dark. It might be rough to listen to, so fair warning. Bridget was born in 1869 in Ballivadny, which is a rural township in County Tipperary. In 1887, she is 18 and working as a dressmaker's apprentice in nearby Clonmel. It's at this point that she meets a young cooper named Michael Cleary. And a month after meeting, the two tie the knot. In the early years of the marriage, the couple actually lived separately. Michael remains in Clonmel to do his cooper work, and Bridget returns home to Ballivadny to look after her elderly parents. And during their separation, Bridget really seems to thrive. She works hard on her family's little farm. She keeps her own chicken. She even starts making her own money selling eggs around the village. Eventually, she makes enough money to be able to buy herself a state-of-the-art Singer sewing machine, which in 1890s rural Tipperary would be absolute cutting-edge technology. And with her former training as an apprentice and her new sewing machine, she starts a business, becoming a successful dressmaker. By all accounts, Bridget Cleary was an exceptional young woman in general, but at the time, even more so. Professional women were very few and far between, particularly in rural Ireland. Even when Michael eventually joined her in Ballivadly, she continued killing it as a strong, independent working gal. She was the primary breadwinner of the household. She was very independent, very stylish. She made her own money. She definitely didn't fit the mold of what a wife in a small rural community ought to be. Bridget was so successful in business, in fact, that they were able to move into the finest house in the village. And even though it was the finest house, it had long sat vacant, stigmatized by the locals because they believed that the house had been built on a fairy ring fort. And if you know anything about fairy lore, Celtic lore, that's a big no-no. But Bridget is a independent modern woman. She doesn't believe all that. They move into their nice house. So it's 1895. Bridget is 26 when she falls very gravely ill with what is likely bronchitis. We can't know for sure. According to the symptoms, sounds like bronchitis, but whatever it was very serious. She was laid up for weeks. It was feared that she would die. It got so serious that a priest was called in to give her the last rites. During her illness, Michael and her father attended to Bridget, but she was the primary breadwinner, so her illness put a lot of strain on the household, and in particular, it seemed to put a lot of strain on Michael. Bridget is literally standing at death's doorstep when she begins to make a bit of a recovery. Her health takes a turn for the better. She's starting to regain a little bit of her strength, and instead of being grateful and relieved, Michael seems to only get more agitated. Of course, this is a small community. The neighbors are constantly coming in and out, checking on everybody, seeing how Bridget's doing. And it's reported that Michael is increasingly concerned about fairies, about the idea that Bridget may not be Bridget. He seems to be convinced that somehow in the depths of her illness, she was swapped out with a changeling. You see it a lot in pre-modern lore, this sort of anxiety about changelings, the idea that the fairies or some non-human entity can swap out the person you love for a counterfeit with something not quite human. On March 13th, the doctor comes once more to see Bridget, proclaims that she's doing better, gives her some medicines, but he also says that even though she is slightly better, she is very agitated. And the doctor and neighbors note that Michael is equally, if not more, agitated. The house is sort of like a boiling kettle. Michael admits to neighbors that he is withholding the doctor's medicine, not giving it to Bridget because he's suspicious of it. He doesn't believe it. He thinks he knows exactly what's going on, that his wife has been replaced by a changeling, that she's a fairy, that she's not human. And so he tries to administer his own remedies. And when Bridget refuses these, he sort of loses the plot. He becomes more convinced that she's a changeling because only a changeling would refuse his efficacious home remedies. Suddenly, everything she does is suspicious. It's like, Bridget wouldn't do that. This isn't her. She's not acting normally. And Michael wasn't alone in this. This became a folie à plusieurs, a madness of many. Over the next several days, Michael and a group of neighbors performed a series of disturbing exorcisms on Bridget. They forced all manner of herbs down her throat. They doused her with urine. They exposed her to fire, trying to drive the fairy out. Bridget, still weak, still sort of fighting for her life, tries to laugh it off. And apparently when she does that, Michael became increasingly aggressive, shouting at her, verbally abusing her, insisting that she admit she wasn't Bridget, she was a changeling. A few days pass and Bridget seems to have vanished. Yes, she's been ill for several weeks, but neighbors stop hearing about her. Only certain neighbors are allowed to visit the house. Michael is acting increasingly odd, and soon rumors begin to circulate around the village that Bridget is missing, that she's gone, vanished. When asked directly, Michael will only give the vague statement that, quote, Bridget has been taken by the fairies. No grief, no further explanation, just that chilling phrase over and over again. Bridget has been taken by the fairies. Now, very suspicious and even more concerned, neighbors would eventually search the property, and what they found in a shallow grave would horrify them to the core. Bridget Cleary, her body horrifically burned. Michael Cleary was arrested, as were 8 others in the days to come. During the course of the trial, the details of that horrific night of March 15th, 1895, would finally come to light. Michael, along with Bridget's father and half a dozen neighbors, were in the house performing their exorcisms. Bridget, weak, fighting for her life, finally had had enough. She laughed at Michael's accusations of her being a changeling, saying that the only one who's off with the fairies was his mother. And it was at that point that he snapped. He wrenched her from bed, forced her towards the fire, as he had done before, fire being a means of cleansing or ridding the body of an unwanted spirit. Her blouse caught fire, and seeing this, he doused her with kerosene. In seconds, she was completely engulfed in flames. Michael prevented all the others from intervening, and so the entire crowd stood by, watching as Bridget Cleary burned to death in her own kitchen. The press went wild. The public was fascinated and horrified in equal measures by this case of a husband burning his wife alive. Michael Cleary famously used the fairy defense. He insisted that his wife was not his wife, that she had been replaced by a changeling. Most of the 9 were convicted, though on surprisingly lenient charges, most sentenced to penal servitude, forced labor. Michael Cleary was convicted of manslaughter, not murder. The judge deemed that the folklore was so deeply ingrained in his cultural consciousness that he genuinely believed that his wife was a non-human substitute. It was an interesting verdict, saying that a culture's folklore is so much a part of your consciousness that you can't separate it from reality. In the years since Bridget Cleary's horrific death, the case has continued to garner interest, notably among psychologists, many of whom believe that Michael Cleary might have been suffering from a rare delusion known as Capgras syndrome, which is a belief that familiars, loved ones, have been replaced by imposters. Whether a case of mental illness, dangerous superstition, or a bit of both, one thing is clear. Bridget Cleary was not taken by fairies. She was murdered by those who were the closest to her, by those who should have protected her and loved her, by those who should have known her the best.